Hello everybody and welcome to the channel. In today's video we have an absolutely outstanding presentation by esteemed astrologer Julija on Venus retrograde, the Leo star point of 2023. As a reminder, our summer term has begun and we have a stellar lineup of instructors from the fabulous Nadia Shaw to Michael Bryan, Shu Yap, Kira Sutherland, Gemini Brett and our highly esteemed faculty members. So if you'd like to learn more about the classes this summer, please visit keplercollege.org. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
Thank you so much to Kepler College for organising these events and inviting me to speak on, by the amount of people we can see online here, it's a hot topic, and we can certainly see that Venus is heating things up at the moment, especially with Pluto squaring the nodes, about to change, and the dynamic very much about to change in the sense of Venus becoming the ruler of the South Node and Mars the North Node. I think that's, quite a significant shift that we're about to be part of. So let me you can see my screen, Callum, yes? I've just got
Beautiful.
to get my...
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. My spotlight so that I can... And you can see this moving. That's my main thing.
Yep.
So, yes. Okay, good. So I've put together a lot of information today, based on so many things that I've done in the past, really. I do remember doing a webinar for Kepler. I think it was 2020, but it's not on your YouTube channel. So some of this is a repeat, because every time you talk about using the Venus star, there's certain things people need to know. And it's although the consciousness of using, let's say, the Venus star in Venus work or astrology work is growing, there's always new people. So if you know some of that, take it in again. But we will be looking at very much the application to right now, okay, and the Leo retrograde coming up of Venus. So yes, as Callum was saying, I run the Cosmic Intelligence Agency. It's an international global group, but not as big as Kepler. It might sound as though there's more of us, and in my sort of sense as a very much Piscean astrologer is that we're all doing the same kind of work, knowing this amazing astrology and, being aligned with cosmos. So it's almost like a free energy to be part of the CIA. If we're doing it, we're there. We're loud and proud astrologers putting it out there. So that's how I see us all being connected. So thanks for being here. I just want to go through a little bit of a background with how I really got into loving the Venus cycle. And I think once you sort of do the time and take the time to really look into the Venus cycle for yourself, or then more for the, collective sort of movement of it, it's just so intriguing, and it just takes you, like a lot of astrology, you start studying eclipses, you'll go further into and find so much more, every time you look into it. So it was the Venus transit. I was at the end of my formal studies of astrology that happened in 2004, and friends of mine gifted me a telescope, and I watched the Venus transit from my front yard with the solar, filter, of course. And I got and before that, leading up to that, I was, very much intrigued about this Venus transit, and because it's so rare, and then was trying to find more about it with astrologers and, in books and so on. You could find you'd find info through astronomy, but not through astrologers. And I thought, wow, that's just, how come that is? So it became kind of a mission for me to, look into it a lot further and so on. So I've been, let's say, looking into it, researching it, since 2004. And it's such an intriguing cycle that the transits are one part of, the Venus cycle. We have the transits of Venus, which are a bigger 240 or 50-year cycle. And then there's even a bigger cycle of how the transits move through a sign, which is like 5,000 years old. And then we come to the like really small cycle of Venus, which is in between one star point and the next star point, which is 9.5 months. So Venus cycles really represent this microcosmic cycle to this massive macrocosmic cycle. And we're going to look, you know, into more the 8-year cycle and the 19-month cycle and the 9.5-month cycle, as opposed to this big one. But there's just so much information about that if you look into it further, we've just lived through the Gemini transits of Venus. And in the time between the Gemini transits, what started? Social media. We became so connected more than ever. And, you know, the world has changed incredibly. And just as an example of that, 120 years ago or thereabouts, the transits happen in Sagittarius. So they happen on the south node of Venus, whereas the Gemini ones happen on the north node. And so the cycle repeats like that. And we can go back to the Renaissance and see that every 240 years, we come back to the point in 251 years it actually is, or 250 and a half to come back to the Gemini point. And we're in this age, you know, again, those of us that have been doing astrology for a long time, we feel as though it's become a renaissance of astrology in the last 10 years or so. We're reflecting the times of the cosmic knowledge, integrating with life like it was at the Renaissance and art. And also reflecting the time of the Age of Enlightenment. So we are in this, I've just called it the Age of Awareness. And when we put that together with the larger Venus cycles, I mean, Venus does reflect all the cultural shifts that happen during those times if you look into it more closely. So, you know, it's very much part of how we value what's happening in the world and collectively shift the perspectives, you know, be that scientifically, culturally, politically. I think when we look at Venus like that, is like, yes, people power, you know, because this is what, you know, Venus represents, is manifesting spirit on Earth. Anyway, you could look into that further. I do hope to write a book about it down the track. Some of these questions are a bit too early. You're going to have to, if you have to hurry up, then come back and watch. Venus stationing right now on the degree of my descendant is not what I'm going to answer right now. So sorry. Okay, so, and you know, again, looking into the Venus cycle a lot more, you know, how many of us drew the 5-pointed star and doodled, you know, on our, you know, when we were bored at school. And, you know, if you doodle the 5-pointed star, of course, you can doodle a 7-pointed star, and you never have to take your pen off the paper. And this was always so intriguing. And this is exactly what the Venus cycle is. It's this never-ending cycle that doesn't stop, right? It comes back to the same point and repeats in exactly the same way over and over and over again. And of course, that's true with many, many, you know, cycles. But the Venus cycle is the most, let's say, beautiful or most, you know, magical when you look at it. Of course, it makes a 5-pointed star. And so every time we look at the 5-pointed star of astrology, which is Venus, you know, it becomes and represents to me what astrology is. It's like a natural fractal, cosmic fractal that keeps giving, that keeps moving, that keeps, you know, changing. There's a pattern that we can follow. And with Venus, every time, let's say this Leo star point comes back, there's a pattern that's reignited in our lives, in our charts. And the more that we're aware of it, you know, the more that we can get very much more co-creative. So whichever way you do astrology, I think the Venus cycle can teach you to be very much part of that, right? To be much more co-creative with your astrology instead of going, what's going to happen? But there's always going to be the what's going to happen that we'll never know. And there's always surprises in astrology that, you know, it doesn't matter how much you study and learn to predict, or if that's what you want, there's always going to be surprises. But looking back at your own rhythm and your own chart is going to really sort of open up the story and go, that's what happened 8 years ago. Oh, and that's what happened 4 years ago. And that's what happened 12 years ago. And so the Venus cycle is very much about 4s and 8s. And so getting to learn the pattern is kind of becomes automatic, right? So yes, it's knowing that, again, all of astrology is like that. It's a divine, eternal rhythm that we were born into, right? Somehow our astrology charts are all so different, and they all show us our own pattern. So, you know, our astrology stamp, our astrology chart contains the rhythm of the universe that we were born into, you know, from the moon cycle, you know, what cycle of the moon we were born into by looking at the new moon before our birth, any of the synodic cycles to do with the sun, Mars, Saturn, any of the cycles, any of the planetary pairs, the nodal cycle, eclipse cycles, and of course the Venus star. And I think the Venus star is one of the easiest ones to follow, because once you know it, it's just so repetitive that and varies so little that, you know, I look at an astrology chart and I just know where the 5 points of Venus are all the time. And it's like, oh, that's going to be hit by Venus, you know, the Venus star point in a few months. And it gathers up the focus for me. So anyway, I urge you all to look further into, if you don't do the homework with the Venus star, then, you know, you're only concentrating on this, let's say, Leo star point that's happening now, or the retrograde that's about to happen, but you can't isolate it as a separate incident, let's say, because it's so connected to the story that has come before. So here we are. This is the beautiful, I mean, we used to do these tables, you know, and write out all the phases of Venus and all that kind of thing, before things like AstroSeek, the wonderful website that gives us this whole table of how to follow Venus through one cycle. Okay, now here we have up the top here the last retrograde point that we had. So we're looking back, not quite yet 19 months ago, but the Venus, the one Venus synodic cycle is 19 months. So the new the new cycle that we're just ending now started in Capricorn, okay, at 18 degrees of Capricorn. How many of you remember the last retrograde and what sort of shifted in your life back then? Of course, it was in Capricorn, so we're looking at a different area of our astrology charts, okay? And for some of us, that Capricorn retrograde would have been much more confronting or demanding or upsetting or, you know, whatever, depending on, you know, again, the pattern that you were born into, right? And then if we follow it all, we see all the phases of Venus, all her ingresses, and then we come down to the next Venus star point 9.5 months after the retrograde point, when Venus is in her outer conjunction, and that happened for the first time ever in Libra in our lifetimes. And that was the shift of the Scorpio star point. The star points move backwards. And so it's really just the Sun-Venus conjunction, of course, that we're looking at all the time to define the star points. And Venus, has moved the star point that had been in Scorpio since the 1920s or earlier, I think, shifted for this first time to 29 Libra. It will go back to Scorpio once more in 4 or 3.5 years' time now, and then come back to Libra in 2027 or something. No, 2030. Anyway, it's a bit of a time to go, but just have a think about also the last 9.5 months since October 2022. And, you know, I'll talk about some of the shifts that we've noticed collectively in this time. But for all of us, somewhere where 29 Libra is, it was also square Pluto, which is also the point where Pluto is already also squaring from. There's shifts going on for all of us. So some kind of relationship pattern from Scorpio to Libra, we have started something, or some kind of a redesigning of our relationships, of our creativity, of what we want to do in life, right? Anyway, so now as you go down, again, you can look at this much more closer on the replay, or go to AstroSeek and get your own time, get your own table, and you can actually look at this for your own phase that you were born into, right? So to check what Venus phase you were born into in your year, okay? Anyway, that's the Venus phase is a bit of a different story. So July the 10th, we're at July the 9th here in Australia. So I'm doing this webinar with Venus at her brightest point as an evening star, which is, I think we planned it like that, maybe. Anyway, so if you haven't seen Venus outside yet in the evening star, as the evening star, you know, she's greatly outshining Mars. They're very close together. And something interesting came up in my thoughts, because I saw someone write that, you know, there was a horary being done around now. And, you know, something about, oh, no, but Venus is being targeted by Mars. You know, Mars is overpowering Venus at this time. And it's like, well, hang on, have you seen how bright she is out there? So I think the visual astrology gives us so much more to consider if we're seeing things for real out there. And so do follow let's say the fall of Venus down to Earth now, as from her brightest spot, she's almost in the spot where she's going to turn retrograde. So she's stationing, you know, she's slowing down big time. You can see she's only moving, you know, 0.24 minutes of arc a day, and then quickly, you know, of course, goes down to station and then set and disappear. All right. And then we go into the retrograde, and then the next Venus star point, which sets off a new cycle of 19 months to do it all again, but in a different pattern. Okay, because she's going through different signs, and the 19-month cycle creates a different pattern. So here we are now, Venus up in the top. If the sun is setting, Venus is high and bright, and with Mars, it's in the northern hemisphere. Venus is much brighter for all of you, much higher in the sky for you, all of you now, because she's at the 12-degree north declination. So from us in the southern hemisphere, she seems a bit lower in the sky, because Leo is a northern sign. So if you understand declination and latitude, you're seeing Venus much brighter, or much higher, let's say, at the moment, in northern hemisphere. So yeah, as I was saying, and now we watch her sort of fall down, and I see this sort of timing, because it's so beautiful to watch if you've got clear evening skies. It's almost like a flare coming down, you know, to Earth. So Venus becomes, you know, the earthly apparition, let's say, from the evening sky coming down to Earth with a message. And we can all think about, okay, so what's the message that she's, you know, giving me or bringing me? And it has something to do with where she was in October last year, at the outer conjunction points, when she was furthest away from the Earth. And if you can think about back at that time, it's like, okay, what did I grasp or learn or intend or find out that I was going to do back then? Or sort of, let's say, you know, give yourself a mission, or maybe you were on a mission and now you're sort of coming down to Earth to actually manifest it further. Okay, so we've all got different stories about that, but just to be aware of what do you call it, the part she is in the sky. So this is a photo I took the other night in a place called Venus Bay. I was in Venus Bay. Victoria has a Venus Bay, and this is from the southern hemisphere point of view. And of course we can see Venus coming up she never touches Mars. It's such a tease story, Venus and Mars cycle. She's very close, but they don't touch. It's almost like Mars moves to Virgo and Regulus and Venus doesn't follow. She's always bound to the sun, so she's got to keep, she's propelled back towards the sun. She's got a mission to complete somehow. It's like, I'll see you later, Mars, and we'll catch up later. And, we'll only get to Regulus, later, I don't even know, late September, I think. So, no, actually even further. Anyway, we can get into that. So, I mean, we all know what Venus represents, but we can just kind of look at the symbolism. What does she mean to me? Think about your own Venus in your chart, what aspects she's making, again, how you relate to her. I really, we often hear, Venus is the goddess of love. Of course she is, and relationship, but to me, she's much more than that. First of all, to be, in relationship or let's say healthy relationship, there needs to be a healthy value of self and a healthy love of self to be in, let's say healthy and significant relationships. So it's about knowing yourself, knowing your body, knowing your talents, your gifts. Of course, it's the very feminine goddess. It's quite confusing, isn't it, in this sort of day and age now with the he's and she's and theys and calling people different things. That's very much part of a new star point in Libra. It's like, oh, what do they call them? Quite embarrassing because it's not our world. Anyway. Going off the cuff a bit, but of course, the representation of the very ancient Egyptian Ankh, which is very much the feminine womb, and the birth canal apparently, and the womb and the canal, and we all entered this way, unless you're an alien or something. There could be some exceptions. So the Venus cycle from one star point to the next star point is 9.5 months. So we already begin our lives in the cycle of Venus. And of course, hopefully it starts with love. And, there we go, and that's where it all begins. So of course, we know Venus is the ruler of Taurus and Libra. With Taurus, it's the very manifesting, side of Venus, the reality, the earth that we live on, our body, what we need to intake and nourish and so on. And Libra, the relationship goddess, the goddess of beauty and aesthetics and relating and so on. Yes, and the Mayan Venus story is incredible as well, and very much part of the Venus cycle, and their whole their whole calendar is based on Venus, and 6 and 5s and 8s and so on, and 58s if I remember. Anyway, then of course the mirror, looking like a Venus. What do you call it? Looking at ourselves and what we like or dislike about ourselves. Venus is all about what we like and dislike. Again, the pain of love, the beauty of love, the love of love, relationships, partnerships, the value of things, money, resources, how we value ourselves is all part of it all as well. And then the relationship to her metal copper. Now, if we understand copper, I think copper is really important to understand here, because copper is a conduit that, put together with iron, which is Mars, generates electricity. So I see Venus in the astrology chart very much like a moon, but a Venus moon, because Venus has phases like the moon. And although she goes around the sun, not the earth, she's got a different she's much more related to the sunny, the spiritual purpose of things, whereas, but she is a very earthy goddess. It's about connecting the spirit and manifesting and how it manifests on Earth, right? And we can see that further in all the cycles that she does. Of course, you know, her symbol is the Earth symbol and the Sun symbol together. So it's about manifesting this spirit. It's about connecting to this incredible cycle that she has. You know, the 5-pointed star that she makes, which is, you know, one of the most magical symbols, pentacle, that has been around forever as well. So she gathers so many of these amazing symbols for us. And the peace sign that she makes in her maximum elongation, and the 2 star points that she makes through her cycle. You know, again, a star has always been also the symbol of something special, right? Something special, a gift, or getting honors somehow. It's very Leo-like as well, where they come together in this star point. And then the sacred geometry of her cycle, which is very much related to the Fibonacci and the golden ratio, okay? And this is the golden ratio that represents aesthetics in our universe, or aesthetics in our art that we create in nature. It's everywhere. And then, you know, relate that to how we live our lives. If we again hone into the Venus cycle deeper and deeper, we recognize that we are actually in this amazing natural sequence of unfolding of events, you know, through this, you know, either 9.5-month story, 19-month story, 4-year cycle, 8-year cycle, and so on. So it's about beautifying your life. It's about making it more balanced, more peaceful, more natural. And anyway, sorry. And so she's got, you know, again, her symbols and what she stands for are all there and have been around for, you know, a very long time. So just a little bit again about the copper sort of connection to Venus. I love finding out that, you know, again, every time you do something, that the island Cyprus, which is where Aphrodite was known to sort of sail into on her shell, is full of copper. Okay, and Cyprus, I think, means copper somehow. But there's also a debate that Kythera was where she started from, and then the wind blew her to Cyprus. Anyway, these amazing ancient stories that sound like they come from nowhere is like they're related because there's so much copper on Cyprus, or was. It's probably all gone now, I'm not sure. So copper is the conduit. So we can see Venus in our charts as connecting the dots. That's why I've always sort of thought of her as connecting the dots. And she's copper is the most, the most durable, recyclable, and has the most attractive qualities for other metals to work with. So I find that's really fascinating in that sense. Silver's more conductive than copper, but copper is more malleable with other metals, you know, with brass and so on, to make someone's saying I'm making talismans with copper at the moment. Wonderful. And then, of course, when you work with copper or whatever, you get the verdigris when it gets wet or moist. The metal reacts with moisture, and we get that copper oxide sort of, which is toxic. It's the two sides of the beautiful shiny thing, two toxic, you know, things that we can't touch. So Venus has those qualities as well. Not everything is, you know, beautiful or consumable or whatever. It's like, it's also, you know, that tease, or it's like, you know, makes us aware of, you know, maybe too much. And, you know, again, jealousy, turning green with envy, beautiful and toxic at the same time, you know, those kind of things. So just bringing up a few things that you know, to think about that will help with all this movement that's going to happen with Venus coming up. The peacock is sacred to Venus, as many of you would know, and the iridescence of the wings or the feathers of the peacock is due to the copper pigments in the wings. And I'm going to talk about the alchemy of this a bit later, but it represents the fifth stage of alchemy, when everything in its fermentation gets on that sort of iridescent glow, about as though something is about to sort of rise up from here. And it's such a beautiful image of, again, what we may be going through in this stage as the retrograde comes up. Okay. So this is now the cycle, and how Venus's cycle relates to this wonderful golden ratio that is, all around us in nature and natural cycles. And, again, the goddess of the most natural cycles is the 1.6 ratio, where it's only from our Earth's perspective that Venus makes this ratio, okay? So that, the 19-month cycle of where she's, does a loop around the sun and comes back to us, in a sense, is, the 584 days of that cycle divided into the Earth cycle around the sun, and we get 1.6. So the 1.6 is also, she does 5 cycles in 8 years to complete this star. Like if we continue drawing this star, 5 complete retrograde cycles. And as we'll find out in a minute, they also are on top of the 5 outer conjunction points. They are together in 2 stars kind of happening at once, which is the same star, which is completely magical. And 5 cycles in 8 years is also the ratio of 1.6. And then Venus revolves around, like our Earth revolves every day, does a rotation, whereas Venus is very slow to rotate, and she actually rotates backwards than what Earth does. And she only does 13 revolutions in 8 years. And that's also a 1.6 ratio. And there's actually more and more and more of this, if you want to go forth and study further. And it's just endless how this is connected into the world around us. The pentacle, to start with, the ratios of the pentacle are full of the golden ratio and sacred geometry, and are kind of endless. There's so much great work on the internet about this, so I'm just kind of touching on it. Again, the beautiful, the ratio that was used during the Renaissance by Da Vinci and what's the other guy's name? Leonardo, in regard to paintings and architecture, and it's still used that way to create the best symmetry of art and aesthetics. It's in our bodies, this ratio, if we divide it all up, again, we see it all around. So it's the phi ratio that is the golden mean. The Fibonacci sequence, where the smaller part, and this is what's, again, so fascinating about the Venus cycle, the smaller part is to the larger part, as it is to the whole, so that every time we unfurl the Fibonacci sequence, it gets bigger by 1.6 every time, and then creates this sort of unfolding. The feminine parts, the womb or reproductive parts, is very much also in this ratio, which is, just incredible, and then all throughout nature. So, what can you say? So again, this is so related to Venus that it's just, beyond beautiful. I probably shouldn't get stuck reading all these comments, but I love to see them. So Shah, this one I'll answer. Shah is saying, I believe that you advise that we look back to the Venus in Capricorn, yes, the 19 months ago, to see what Venus was bringing to Earth back for us then, right? Yes, absolutely. Since the relationship from Venus in Leo to her earlier Capricorn placement is the quincunx relationship. Yeah, so every time, the star pattern I'm going to get to a bit more in a minute. So anyway, keep thinking. It's all, again, once just it becomes very automatic with the Venus cycle. So then Leo, we know all about Leo. So there's only ever 5 star points happening, in the cosmos at once, or from our perspective. and they cycle backwards. So they've all got their own quality and theme. Of course, this one's in Leo. So what does Leo mean to you? Where is Leo in your chart? Where is Leo in your chart, specifically between 28 degrees and 12 degrees? And, you know, what does Leo represent for you? And then we've already had Venus in her shadow period moving through. What has she already brought up? Because she's going to be going back there, right? And then back forward through there. So it's, you know, we can see with all retrogrades, there's this, you know, loop that is very significant. And besides Mars, whose retrogrades only happen about every 2 years, Venus is the next least retrograde, okay? Because it's only every 19 months. So they're much more significant. Venus and Mars retrogrades, to me, for that reason, are the ones that we can, like eclipses, we go, oh, where are they? What are they doing this year? Okay. And there's a star point every year, although there's 2 in the year that happens in if there's one in Capricorn, then the other one will be, you know, it's still January and then October, we get 2 happening. So every 4 years we get 2 happening, but otherwise there's once a year. So so again, we look forward to them. So we know what Leo represents. It's ruled by the sun. It's illuminates our purpose and our joy and our fulfillment. It represents the pride that we carry, the talents and the gifts that we're given and how we utilize them, the ego involved with that, the people that respond in joy to our sort of gifts and talents, and especially with Venus in there, isn't it? It's like, do you like me? Do you like what I do? Can we, you know, it's like a rapport when Venus is in Leo. It's not just be by myself, you know, shining away. It's like Venus needs that interaction, doesn't she? She's not that, you know, I think she's okay on her own and doing the Taurus stuff. But, you know, then in Leo, I think there's much more need for that interaction, or we can't judge enough by ourselves without the interaction, I think. So it's very necessary. Yeah, the joy and also the specialness. Oh, you good little boy or you good little girl, and how we grew up with that and the wounds that could carry forever if that wasn't the case in our growing up. So it represents, you know, us as a youth as well, and how we were given, let's say, the joy to be, or, you know, celebrated, let's say, you know, for our own uniqueness. And then, you know, as we get older, it's also, we've got to make that happen ourselves all the time. Okay. So beautiful image, or, you know, symbolism of the sun and purpose and enlightenment, let's say, and putting it together with this incredible cycle. So you're getting a deeper understanding, or it's actually quite simple, isn't it? You know, to put it together with this never-ending cycle. And then the way that we, again, embody that, use that, look at that as our own special way to manifest on this planet. And then, well, collectively, again, you know, I think, what was it, 2017, when we started more Venus star work, it's like at these significant points, they're probably the most beautiful points for us to collectively put together our intentions for the planet, you know, for all around the world, and realign our values for what we want. It's like at the moment we're getting nuclear mass destruction threats. So the light work is, you know, we come together to represent this spirit. I think it's something that we can work on a lot further. So let me just, any big other things going on here? Okay, so Venus retrograde in Leo. With everything that I've sort of, you know, started with explaining, Eileen's asking, what does it mean when Venus star point 20 in Leo conjuncts my natal 21 degrees of Leo? It means that 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago, this, well, maybe more 4 years and 8 years ago, and mostly 4 years ago, the Venus star point in 2019 was on your, what did you say, sun? My natal 21 degrees Leo Venus. Is your Venus at 21 Leo? And so people are writing in, I've got 12 degrees Venus at Leo. So again, your Venus is going to be hit by this retrograde. The retrograde begins at 28 Leo. Anyway, we're going to get to that. Sorry, it's right here. I'm not going to get distracted now. Anyway, so Venus retrograde begins 23rd of September, 23rd of July till September, but we're already, passing all those degrees. From 29 Leo, I've just rounded it up. It's actually 28.36 or something, and then 12 degrees. And, 2 or 3 degrees either side of that is very much part of this story. With Venus and the orbs and anything to do with the Venus star, I always use 2 to 3 degree orbs and nothing wider. I think when you use orbs that are too wide, especially for faster moving things, even if they're retrograde, you're pulling in too much information. So here are the peak points. We'll look at those a bit closer. A retrograde usually lasts for 40 days and 40 nights, and we've heard all those sort of significant tales and biblical stories about what 40 days and 40 nights is all about. But this particular retrograde is 42 days and 43 nights or something like that. And it all depends on the degrees and minutes. And it really doesn't matter if it's a little bit over or less, but, we're in that sort of idea that, the references to fasting, doing something, Lent, is 40 days and 40 nights, temptation, some kind of temptation, some kind of trial, some kind of pilgrimage or wandering. So, this is a perfect time to actually change a habit, set off some kind of new course that you really know that you need to do or start. So take that sort of intention with you during the retrograde as Venus slows down, and you can really sort of, take her at a slower pace. Because at the other side, when she's in a superior conjunction, she's moving faster than the sun. That's why how she becomes the evening star. She overtakes the sun. So this is the time to really gather Venus's energy, because at the other point, she's kind of wild. Venus in this stage, as she comes to the retrograde, is only out of light, let's say away from us, in light for about 8 to 10 days, depending on latitude and where you live and so on. So she pops up very quickly as the morning star again. So really, if you think about Venus out of light or in the underworld, she's only disappeared for that short amount of time, but she's still retrograde and very much present, right? So it's a good time to work with a lot of things, and a lot of astrologers do work with, resetting. Retrogrades always mean resetting, renewing, refocusing, relating, fixing our relation, whatever needs to be done in this case with Venus. So if we think about Venus returning to the same place of the zodiac, we all have heard about Venus returns, and the proper, let's say, Venus return is every 8 years. It's not when Venus, comes back to, let's say, 21 Leo every time. It's only every 8 years that she will come back to Leo 21 in this phase as a retrograde. And, in this sign of degree of the zodiac. So, when we're told our Venus return happens every 8 years, because Venus comes back to the same phase relationship to the sun and sign that you were born into. And that's why the 8-year cycle, when you're 8 years old, what happened when you were 8? 16, 24, 32, and so on. This is tapping into your own Venus return, okay? And then finding when Venus and the sun were conjunct before you were born is called your Venus star point. So it's like finding the pre-eclipse Venus Venus and the sun before you were born is the Venus star cycle you were born into. Okay, so if you haven't done that, find when Venus, you can go to Astrology to find that, and I've got a few other things. I will show you how to grab that as well. So we know the last retrograde happened 19 months ago, but it was not in Leo, was it? Okay. And so have a think back. First of all, as one of our comments here was, recall the last retrograde in Capricorn. What happened? What house? How did you come out of that? Some of us, it's like, oh, it was nothing, but my mother had a problem, or it was this, so many varied stories. And then do you recall the last retrograde in Leo in August 2015? It's always August because the sun's in Leo. The sun has to be in Leo for the star point to happen. So again, it's easy to work out. Oh, the Capricorn star point, sun's in Capricorn. Venus is with the sun. And then the in-between point, which is also really, we hear a lot about the 8-year cycle of Venus, but not so, sorry, the 8-year cycle, which is extremely evident, and it's called the Venus return. But with the Venus star cycle, we have the point also in the middle, but that only happens with the Venus sun conjunction. So it's a little bit tricky. It's not like a return. It will happen every 8 years, but not every 4 years. Anyway, we'll see that in a minute. So this is Venus as she is right now today, okay, at 25 degrees 18 Leo, and then here she is exactly at that degree again next year, but she is not in the same phase. She is an evening star, but as opposed to Venus here stationing to fall down into retrograde as the evening star, this Venus has just come out as the evening star. And this is what makes her cycle, following her cycle and these 8-year returns very significant, okay? Because she's not back at she's back at 25 Leo, 20 minutes, right? Or there's 18 there, but anyway, the same. But she's not back in the same phase relationship with the sun and the same, she's at the same degree, but she's not in the same, let's say, purpose as she was here or there, okay, if that makes sense. So this is what we look at in the bigger 19-month cycle, the synodic cycle of Venus, and you were born into one of those phases, and that's the phase we want to see you follow and return every 8 years. But when we follow the Venus star, we're adding an extra bit, and that's the 4-year point. So here we are with Venus turning retrograde. I'm just using a 0 Aries chart. At 28 degrees of Leo, coming up very soon. And this is how, when she turned retrograde in Leo last time, on the 25th of July, 2015, so 8 years ago. But with everything with Venus, she moves 2 degrees backwards 2 to 3 degrees backwards every 8 years. So every return will be 2 to 3 degrees backwards. So here we go. We can see that Venus was 2 degrees ahead 8 years ago. So her retrograde began in Virgo. Okay. And now this is the first time that we have a retrograde begin exactly in, in Leo. Okay. For a long, for quite a long time. So this retrograde denotes the starting of a Venus retrograde cycle that will happen every 8 years fully in Leo. Because before that, the last 100 years it's been starting in Virgo and coming back to Leo and so on. So this is how we follow the star, and know that the star point, again, we can gather star point energy anytime, every 8 years. We can kind of go, okay, well, wherever Venus is today, in 8 years' time, she's going to be 1 or 2 to 3 degrees back in the same spot and back in that same star magic. Okay, so again, we can draw that star, from any point that we want to. So here we're going to see, this star point sort of taking action for us. And again, 8 years ago, in 2015, when the retrograde started, can anyone think back at what was happening for them? And often, if you're doing a consultation or something, some people don't remember. And it's, again, this is where you sort of, or sometimes it comes back and go, oh yeah, wow, that was significant. So, the remembering and the returning is also what we're being asked for in some sense as well. So, what am I saying? Yeah, so this is the first retrograde to begin in Leo since 1876, when Venus stationed at 0 Leo. Okay, but that was, at the end of a cycle. But this cycle began and it relates back to the star point and the retrogrades that were happening in 1772. So 250 years ago. Incredible how it connects in these cycles. So again, the greater cycle of Venus coming into this story as well, and then going back in time, to 1521 and 1270 and whatever. If you want to look into past life stuff, I suppose you could go further. I don't have to have a look. So let's just have a look at the quality of this retrograde that begins with a quincunx to Pluto and Neptune, pretty much. Just looking at the news last night and that sort of threat of mass destruction, with Mars and Venus, both in this kind of, Mars by the time of the retrograde has moved off, but at the moment they're right, together. And, it sort of really brings in the collective and the difficulty, and it's going, hang on, that's not what we want. But there's not a lot we can do about it, anyway, that kind of energy. So Venus in this really collective aspect to Neptune and Pluto, who are, getting very close to making their sextile, or, in sextile, a very close sextile at the moment. And over coming years, I think it tightens. Where are we at? What's our place in this whole big, story? And, again, we can relate to where is Venus in our chart? How is she connecting? What's our purpose here? What's our creative purpose in this story? And again, many of us have got much more personal issues going on to do with, these inconjuncts, of, what may be threatening us or survival, so many things going on for all of us that really pull up this thing. I mean, everything's gotten so expensive. It's, most of us are pretty okay, but when you think about the rest of the world, if it's expensive for us, it's like, well, how are all these other people coping? Anyway, so at this same time, Venus trine and sextile the nodal axis. So whatever difficulty or not such the quincunx is always very annoying aspect. It's like we got to get through this, but we're not quite sure how. Venus retrograde denotes, don't try and push it, just kind of sit with it. She's stationing there, so it's like let it sort of come through, and the let's say the qualities will emerge, or the answers will emerge, right? Because there is the sextile to the nodal axis, which I think whatever pivotal thing we're going to be going through, there is a solution. So never fear, there is a solution coming. And that's very much to do about how we trust in the unknown as well, especially with Neptune involved. And then, the wider threats that may be happening in the world around us. Venus is also at the midpoint of Mercury, Saturn, and Neptune and the Sun. So really bringing in, a focus, Mercury, Saturn, and inspiration, focus and inspiration all at once, Neptune and the sun, of course, being in Leo. So, the retrograde begins with the sun's just movement into Leo. Venus becomes the ruler of the south node. The nodal axis is changing very quickly now to be north node in Aries. So she becomes the ruler of the south node. It's going to be really interesting to watch what shifts there, and we can already feel it. You know, it's almost like, again, Venus, ruler of the north node. Again, inflation, everything's gotten so expensive. How is that going to turn around? Maybe we'll see things move faster with Mars ruling the north node, but also getting much more volatile. Wait and see. Pluto squares the nodal axis. I'm not going to talk about that as much as I was intending to, but again, that's also like a really big part of it. So we can't isolate. Well, we do want to isolate the retrograde, but we can't isolate anything in astrology from everything else that's going on. And the sun, of course, is opposite Pluto. So we're going into this with some kind of like I don't want to call it just a threat, but a power play for sure, an intense power play on the world stage. But then if we put it back to our own sort of story, it's the, you know, what power play are we in? How are our relationships going? You know, there's equality with every Venus you know, every Venus is all about balance and equality in relationship. So, you know, bringing in relationships that, you know, are not, you know, being overpowered or something by someone in our lives. And then, you know, the usual thing, the fixed signs are going to feel this the most, or any planets that you've got in Taurus, Aquarius opposite, or Scorpio are going to feel the effects by square, you know, and really sort of channeled into like, you need to get through this. It's quite dynamic. Squares are very dynamic and they make things happen, which is great. They're very good at manifesting. Oppositions, of course, coming from the other side. I need to integrate that into my story. And of course, if you've got Leo planets, then you're infusing. This is completely infused with your planets and story. And then we move to the star point. And the star point, when we use the star point, we focus on the star point, because once we know the star point, we know that the retrograde, you know, begins 8 degrees earlier and finishes 8 degrees after the star point. So again, it's a focus point that you can always gather, oh, there was a retrograde there, you know, back in 2015 or 2007, give or take that 2 or 3 degrees and 2 or 3 days. And so it's really easy again to spot. So that's why we focus on the Venus star point, as, you know, it's the peak of the transit, and from there you can know more, let's say. So it's at 20 degrees of Leo, and what we've got happening there is, of course, this square to Uranus. And it's amazing how many star points are actually connected to the Uranus cycle. And that's because it's an 84-year cycle, I think, that is the division of 4 and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, let me see. So Uranus, we're bringing in, a retrograde that begins with the 2 big outer planets in an inconjunct peaks with a square to Uranus, and then it's going to stop. I mean, it's going to station with a square to Jupiter. That's quite a trial, right? It's picking up so much of the energy and the collective energy. So I think this Leo cycle is very much about, it's not just about you, it's how you fit your own story into the wider picture in the world as well, okay? So have a look where this is hitting off for you. You know, what house is Uranus in at the moment, and how this star point is actually, you know, promoting that change, you know, highlighting, you know, come on, you haven't changed that yet. You've been saying you're going to be doing that. It's still here. It's still annoying you. You still haven't done anything about it. Or it's an ignition into believing in the change and, you know, again, manifesting something about that. Again, it could be the change we need in our bodies. It could be the change we need in our relationship. It could be the change we need to move, or, you know, whatever it is that we have to do. Black Moon Lilith is right there as well. So she's kind of bringing in this representation of, let's say, a force, a very gravity force that is propelling us deeper into the story and what we want to bring out of that. So it's asking us to be bolder and more individual, isn't it? Somehow. And then we can look back at, as I said, the 8-year cycle was here as well, the star point, but 4 years ago, the outer conjunction of the star, and again, we can only look at it, the 20 degree, I think it was 21 degrees of Leo. There was a point in August 2019 at this superior conjunction, and that's when Venus overtook the sun and moved very fast behind her to become from a morning star to an evening star. It's the point of the cycle where she disappears for about 60 to 80 days. And this is traditionally more understood by shamanic astrologers, and the story of Inanna's descent into the underworld is not this point, the retrograde, but the other one. But you can use it however you like. It's a meaningful, story anyway. I'll get into that a little bit in a sec. So again, it's related to what happened in 2019 as well. All right. So 15, 19, 2011, 2007 is all the pattern of this story that is happening now. Of course, we've got different signatures to this star point between the aspects that are happening outside, of course. And then the retrograde ends. So we have this zone that, Venus is highlighting here. And 12 degrees of Leo is very much square to Jupiter. So, again, at the end, by the end, Jupiter is all about the living truth. Okay. I see Jupiter, again, it's the truth planet. In Taurus, again, being very much true to our bodies, not kidding ourselves about the reality of things as well. It's very real and tangible in regard to, what we're doing. We can dream up so many things and, how many of them manifest. So this is asking for, let's say, manifesting, I think, dreams and the things that we are very able to do and very much able to make happen, okay? So it's not fooling ourselves or kidding ourselves, okay? So at all these points, so this is, square Jupiter. There is a 135 now in conjunct to, no, sorry, it's the square aspect. What's that called? The sesqui square, which is a hard 135 degrees. So again, that brings in what I just said about, it's not mucking around with just, dreaming away. Venus is at the midpoint of, look at this, Ceres, Sedna. I've got Ceres twice. There must be someone else involved. Sedna and Ceres. Sedna is also just, again, very collective sort of spirit. Rising up from the ocean, being in Gemini, a new awareness very much about such a slow-moving dwarf planet, moving signs. It's like, again, a rising awareness of so many things. 12 degrees. Oh, and 12 degrees Leo is the planetary node of Neptune as well. So if we understand every planet has a node in relationship to the sun and the earth, and 12 degrees Leo is the planetary north node of Neptune. So again, this is how significant I think it is for us to really, channel collective visions at this time as well and believe in them and believe that, again, the story of the world and how it's going, it seems so hopeless. But again, we can't give it faith. And we can change things around somehow, and we got to believe in that. We see progress in so many areas and departments. So again, with tracking Venus, we need to look back in the 8-year and 4-year cycles and understand the rhythm that 4 years ago she was the outer conjunction point here, 8 years ago she was retrograde here. 12 years ago, she was at the outer conjunction point again. And 16 years ago, she was also retrograde here. But, 2 degrees inching, sort of forward from our perspective backwards in the zodiac. And this will give you the kind of magical sort of connection to be able to follow the Venus star in your own astrology chart, and continue, again, the cycle and connecting it all together, not separating this cycle as, it's a retrograde of Venus in Leo, as though it's only happened, for the first time. No, it's not happened for the first time. It's been there. And it's been there 4 years ago to reiterate what is going on for your Venus magic, for your manifestation of life on this planet in that zone of the zodiac. So here I've color-coded the Venus star points. And again, there's only ever 5 operating at any one time on the planet, because it's a 5-pointed star, right? And so here we have the 16 Capricorn, followed by the Libra one that we had for the first time ever, that then will repeat in 4 years' time as a retrograde. Okay, here we have the Leo star point that will repeat as the outer conjunction again in 4 years' time. And so, again, I've color-coded them all. So as we can see, the next retrograde will happen in Aries, okay, from that retrograde to that retrograde. That's the arm of the star that we follow for retrogrades, okay? But every 9.5 months, there's the middle point here that Venus goes around in 9.5 months to get there to overtake the sun, and 9.5 months later, come back here. Oops. So that's how we follow the star, and that's how that beautiful pattern is made. And so, yes, you can go back to this color-coded star point and see that, operating. And then I've just color-coded so to see where all the retrogrades will be, and where all the outer points are happening at this point. And so if there's a retrograde in Leo, in 4 years, there will be the outer conjunction. So we've got this amazing sort of double up of the star. And this is what, hang on, I just want to show you this. And this is how, like, again, we put 2 stars on top of each other, but again, they're all working at once. So we can see the retrograde star here, but we can see that in between, if you follow the years, 2018, 20, hang on, ooh, that should be 19, sorry. Anyway, sorry. So anyway, just to know that you're following, a star point, and the star is continuing, drawing like this all the time and doesn't stop. So if you're drawing one continual star, then you're drawing either a retrograde star or you begin drawing the retrograde star, or you can draw the outer conjunction star. But again, they're working on top of each other. So yeah, two stars operating at once, retrograde star, direct star, repeating in the same spot of the zodiac every 4 years. And the way that I look at them, it's like very much a retrograde is like a new moon point, and the opposite star point that happens in the same spot is like a full moon point. And we'll see that in a minute, the phase returns are only every 19 months, but a phase sign return, which again is what we're looking at the retrograde points, is an 8-year cycle. So again, you can go back to this, and then we see these conjunctions of the Venus and the Sun every 9.5 months. Every 19 months, they create a new cycle. Every 4 years, it's half, represents the repeat of the half cycle. And then every 8 years is the full star pattern happens, with 5 cycles happening, or 10 cycles in the sense 5 retrograde points and 5 outer conjunction points happening on top of each other in the same time frame. So this is, now if you haven't done this, you need to get like I said, find out the star, the head star, as we call it, that you were born into. So the star point that happened before your birth. Okay, and like I'll just give an example. If, let's say, you were born, and again, you won't be because I don't think a 3-year-old would be watching this, but June the 3rd, 2020, if you were, let's say, born July 2020, you'd be looking at June the 3rd star point, so 13 Gemini, as your head star point. Okay, so if you go to this this URL, you can get a copy of the star point, which is, Ariel Gutman put together when she published her book Venus Star Rising, and we all use it because it's just such you can of course find it in your software, and now put the 5 points into your software program quite easily, and and see the star sort of around your birth, and see the star around your that's happening now, and add it to your charts, or you can do it manually, and doing it manually will actually teach you a lot more. So again, for all the classes that we do, we get you to do, or workshops, it's like, do it manually, and you come back going, oh, and even draw it on your chart, because that sort of gives you, oh, there's one on my descendant, or one has passed my midheaven, over the years, and what happened when the Venus star point was ebbing on my midheaven. Again, they ebb there for a while. The Venus star is not a quick mover in that sense. So it's kind of like a phase of life that you can really relate to. And it does get stronger at one point, and then sort of goes backwards and falls away somewhat. So you can look back at and I urge you to, if you're very interested in the Venus star and the work, is to do that through your lifetime. Find the 5 points that you were born into, and then follow the star moving backwards over your life, over your chart, through your lifetime, and highlight the most significant points. I remember looking at my star point, and this is again what super intrigued me, again, things that happen in your own life that take you on these journeys, or these big fractal sort of journeys of research, is noticing the Venus star first in my own chart and going, oh, okay, when I was 8 years old, it was on my descendant. Or one of the star points was on my descendant, the Gemini star point. And I first met my husband when I was 8 years old. It was to do with the community. I was in Lithuanian community, blah, blah, blah. But still, we met. He was 16 and I was 8. And many years later, we hooked up and got together, but we both remember it very well. And it's amazing how it shows up, and it's like, oh, that's what happened then. So, look back, if you're coupled up or met your boyfriend, what was the star that was happening around that time? Again, the before star, it could be in between stars. So again, like eclipses, you're looking at the star points, from both perspectives, right? Ariel Gutman does more work about very much the relationship star, where your head star means your special gift, your talent, what you were born into, or an impulse of following your Venus story. And it does give a lot of insight into that. Mine is conjunct Uranus on the midheaven. I love Venus and astrology. So, it's just perfect. But you can do more work with Ariel's book, Venus Star Rising, where the receiving arm and the giving arm say a lot about the relationships, but I haven't got time to get into that. I just want you to really sort of find your own Venus star to understand what's happening with this one. So again, thank you to AstroSeek for their most beautiful and correct, I have to say correct, Venus star cycle diagram. In this, we can see where we are here. If we follow this is the evening star falling down to retrograde, and the black dots in the middle when Venus is in between the sun and the earth is the retrograde. Okay, she comes out of the retrograde as a beautiful morning star. You follow this blue line, and here we go. And oh no, And sorry, we've got to go all the way around. I've lost it. We've got to follow the blue line and we go around to F5, okay? So that the next star point, it's got to be an outer conjunction star point, doesn't it? No, sorry, it's this one here in Gemini, okay? So if we've got the star point here, it's going to take 9.5 months for this to connect back here and be the superior conjunction outside in Gemini next year in 2024, where then it comes back for the next retrograde, which is the next one back from, oh gosh, I've lost the track anyway. Sorry, it's just because I'm 26. We're just going to follow the years. But you can see what I'm doing here. So the next time the retrograde is going to happen, the next time the star point will happen in Leo is in 2027, in 4 years' time. And here we can see her in the outer conjunction. We can't see her from Earth, all right? So you can follow all the star points like this in this magical diagram. You can go to AstroSeek and, download it. Draw on it. Again, in workshops, it's like you want to sort of learn how to draw the star so you can see what's happening. And look, I used to make sort of animations of Venus, but they've been superseded by amazing stuff being done by so many things. But what do you see in this chart? This is shared a lot and a lot by astrologers. And, we're looking at this sort of pattern being made that we recognize as Venus retrograde, as the Venus cycle pattern. But it's actually wrong. Can someone tell me why? Does anyone know why this is wrong? Come on, guys, think about it. Well, I'll give you a clue. Oh, hang on. So you've got to watch. When she's opposite, when the Sun and Venus are opposite, is when the loop happens, which is not the case. It's when Venus and the Sun are together on the same side of the chart is when the retrograde happens. But this diagram is showing the loop happening, the loop happening when they're opposite each other. Now, that is, again, because this diagram or graphic doesn't work is because the Sun is at the center. And this is not the perspective that we see the Venus star and rose happening. It's because we are on Earth that we're seeing the Venus rose happening or the Venus star being made. So this wonderful diagram that I got off YouTube, thank you to Ujwal Suryakant Rane for this graphic, because what we just saw there is, I'm just going to start that again, is Venus going around the Sun, which is how the diagram before was shown. But we need to see it from the perspective of Earth, because from our perspective on Earth, the Sun looks like it's going around, all right? And then Venus goes around the Sun. So that is how it's created, okay? So just watch this for a little bit. And again, there's so much stuff on the internet that can be so confusing. I get so frustrated because it's like, oh, geez, it's so simple, but it's so frustrating because it's the wrong things being sort of taught. And so again, we have to understand the perspective that it's all coming from. Okay, so that's our perspective. The Sun goes around the Earth, right? And then Venus joins that perspective in a moment here. Hang on. So he's going to put in the Venus. And then, of course, Venus is in between us and the Sun, as is Mercury. And the Mercury cycle is also as fascinating. And then we watch the loop continue from there, so that, as Venus cycles around the Sun, she comes down, this is evening star, she comes down for the loop, she does the loop, she comes out as the morning star. And this is where, of course, we get that beautiful pattern. So again, continuing around, and I think he's going to start drawing it in a moment. So again, just be wary of what you learn out there. Trustworthy sources is I think, such a big part of what we're in and the world we're in now, of deception and fake news, and oh my gosh, and even in the world of astrology, there's so much great stuff happening, and stick with the I don't know, the tried and tested. Yeah, so look, I mean, a lot of us know this already, but, for some of you, it's very new. So I think that's, quite significant and important to, to take in. So you're understanding that retrograde loop, you're understanding how it's drawn, how it's drawing in your chart. This is, the ecliptic is that sunlight. So this is the zodiac, that yellow line in our chart. And so, when you put it into that perspective, you're going, wow, okay, this is the pattern that is in my astrology chart. And I just think that that's so beautiful. I'd love to see it sort of animated, in our own chart, so to speak. It's probably not that far away. I'll just let it finish drawing, because then it makes the full cycle. So that's the 4th point. And then the 5th point. So you see how far Venus has to travel, to make the next sort of loop, let's say, around the zodiac. So pretty much every 9.5 months, she's traveling, 280 degrees, or half of 284 around the zodiac, which is, nearly 3/4, and then does it again. No, it's actually 4/5. Let's just be more correct. 4/5 every time in 9.5 months. She travels 4/5 of the zodiac and then does it again for the 9.5 months. Again, so here we are, the retrograde of Venus is coming down. This is one synodic cycle. Understanding one synodic cycle well will give you the impulse to understand all of Venus's cycles, but we're not going to get into the nuances of the cycle so much. I'm going to concentrate on the star points. That, the retrograde and the disappearances of Venus are here, and a lot bigger on the other side when she disappears for longer behind the sun. And it's really interesting that at this phase, when she's disappeared behind the sun, from our perspective, she's also very, within 5 degrees of the sun for about 40 days and 40 nights. So there's a mimicking of that sort of retrograde and this kind of very close connection to the sun, right? So this is why this can be also considered such a big trial and very much related to the retrograde, because Venus and there's no other planet that stays with the sun for so long in travel. Okay, so even through a retrograde, the sun will move up quickly, but Venus, 40 days and 40 nights in this particular part of the cycle too. So just being very much aware of that as well, and that, again, starting the new kind of cycle with the retrograde makes sense as she becomes a morning star and then comes out of the evening star, after this long trial. Some of us actually have a harder time here than with a retrograde. A retrograde's almost like just a retreat, a relief, I'm just going to do things differently for a while. Whereas over here, we might find ourselves on that mission going, oh my God, I've got to deal with this is so fast. Fast-moving planets are or as tricky as retrogrades, or even more so, I find. So keep an eye on that. And again, you might have found the 2019 trial, let's say, much more significant than what you're going to have here. So again, think about it, the bringing down of it all in this time from what you experienced 9.5 months ago. And it's really also significant, that sort of story of the new moon. A new moon, of course, comes out as an evening, planet, because it's from the perspective of Earth, right? The new moon comes out here. But with Venus, she goes around the sun. So her new moon sort of phase starts the other side, as she's a morning star. And we never see her full. We never see her quite full. We only ever see her as a crescent. Therefore, this kind of mission behind the sun is like this private mission where we're called to pretty much be in our fullness. But only us can see. And that's very much that story of Inanna descending into the underworld and being stripped bare. So this is a reflection, this new part, of something that you learnt 9.5 months ago or added to your story. And again, why the 4-year cycle is very important of the Leo star point here. And then in 4 years' time, the Leo star point is going to be out here, is because the moon does that. If we had the moon at 11 Capricorn, a full moon just the other day, in 4 years' time, there's going to be a new moon at 11 Capricorn. And then it peters out. It only sort of happens once or twice and then peters out. So any full moon or new moon that you find is going to be repeated 4 years later in exactly the same, or in the opposite zodiac degree, okay? Because that's how new moons and full moons work. But with Venus, it's like the zodiac sign and degree returns, but she's in a different phase. And this is, again, why it's really important to connect those dots of the 4-year cycle as well, because it gives us a different perspective from 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, Venus was out there behind the sun in Leo doing this star point very quickly, but again, on trial. How does that also relate to now and what we're doing and how she is in that position now going retrograde? Okay. I mean, there's just so many stories there. Is someone going to collect them all for us? Yeah, I'm glad to see that you're all thinking about it and, putting your story together. And that's how, again, we learn and put it together. So the way I look at these star points is that from one to now we're going to, again, we need your story to be looked at on that deeper level from 8-year cycles to 4-year cycles, and every star point that you want to look at like that. But now I'm going to sort of move to a more of a collective sort of level of, and again, you can relate it to your own chart, is when we think about, like I keep saying, what happened 9.5 months ago that's being brought down to earth now. And this is where we gather themes, so the last point was at 29 Libra. This whole cycle started in Capricorn. How are all those 3 points, the 9.5-month points, connecting to the story now as well? So this is like weaving the thread. So from one star point to the next, as I was saying earlier, I see them as eclipse points. And so they gather, like we know that the nodal cycle is shifting. Eclipses have started in Aries, and there will be one in Taurus still this year, and then they move to Aries, Libra. We look at those cycles and where the nodal cycle is moving through our lives, and it's like highlights if we see planets there. Same with the Venus star points, is connecting the story. So again, connect the story. The Capricorn star point at 18 degrees, the 29 Libra star point, and now the Leo star point, okay? Because this is how, again, your story unfolds. And for any of those points, you can go into the fractal story of the 4-year cycle and the 8-year cycle infinitely until you were born or after you go or whatever, to connect further. But so anyway, so now I just want to move into what we've found and what kind of stories are coming up. So from the Capricorn morning star point that's seeded with the last retrograde, we saw things coming before that and after that, like that really highlight the Capricorn star point. Again, Venus very much reflecting the values of society and what becomes popular and trends and, Venusian things that are in our collective. And it was the Capricorn star point, and there were so many vaccination legality things happening. I remember, what's the tennis player? Novak Djokovic was in Australia holed up because he wanted to play in the tennis tournament but wasn't vaccinated, and the Australian government, and he had the Venus star point right on his ascendant. So he was very much out there in regard to, his rights and, not protesting, but he was, the government cracked down on him. Soon after that, we had the Wade versus Roe, feminine issues being decided by old fart men in, like wigs still, right? Like the Capricorn Council, that's supposed to, understand women and bodies, and it was just so in your face. And then the Amber and Johnny Heard case, which was all about, the litigation and the court system and how it dealt with this relationship issue. This is only a really small, bit of it. And then as we got, and again, these are melding over, we get to the Libra star point next year. And again, we can think about what things shifted for ourselves. But, again, Libra is all about relationships and diversity, recognizing the other, sharing viewpoints or debates, the idealism that's in, art, the values of society where Saturn is exalted. So we've had these kind of two Saturn-y types. But I found it amazing that it was a really, although AI had been around somewhat, it was like kind of gifted to us around this point where we started playing with AI art. It's like a new design, a new thing to talk. It's just incredible. There's a lot of other, aspects that we'd see that was relating to, but, and then, we'd see the alliances on the planet changing very much so. We do know that the war in Ukraine was birthed in this Capricorn thing, and then, gathering the alliances they needed to, help them, and all that NATO stuff. It's so Libran. And then the LGBTQ rights and the new naming of all the ways that we should, sort of talk to someone. Drag queens being banned for, social events and stuff that involve kids. I mean, just so many sort of things like that, social issues. And then in Australia, very interestingly, the People's Voice campaign that started, giving our First Nations people, well, not yet, but a referendum to vote for adding them to our voice in Parliament. And then I think just generally the change of social media. I'm just going to put this in quickly. The star point that is happening now is very much related to 251 years ago, which was the same star of the 1770s. So again, putting back the macro cycle to the micro cycle. I'm putting that in there because America got its independence and Australia was discovered at this time, and many other things in the world, but that relate to, let's say, the kind of rebirth that is going through at the moment. We had this 29 Libra star point come in for the first time as well. Right, so very new changes going on. Here it is here. And so you can see the pattern repeating exactly. It's just so spot on. And I'm bringing this up again because of the newness of the Libra star point that I've been talking about. I did this, we were doing a workshop for the Libra star point, as we do every 9.5 months. And I thought, I'll have a go at this AI thing. It's quite fascinating. And I prompted something like, Venus behind the sun, doing some magic or something. And then, this is kind of, quite a simple image, but this is what came up. And it's like, oh my God, okay, this is what it showed me. But then I looked back to 1771, exactly 250 years ago. And this is an art piece by Joseph Wright, called The Alchemist Discovering Phosphorus. So really what I sort of gleaned from that, we've all found a new light behind the sun somehow to bring with the Libra star point that is coming into action by, 2030 again, but very much evident now, like this new thing. And, part of it is AI, but this is new spirit sort of blooming. And then if we look at the themes that we saw, remember the last star point, that is the Libra one now, was in Scorpio. So Scorpio, we're in the arm from Scorpio to Leo. or Libra to Leo right now. And these are the things that were happening in 2018 when the star point happened in Scorpio and then moved to Leo. Greta Thunberg was, traveling around the planet. I shouldn't have Epstein there, but it was the time just before in the Capricorn star point, it was Weinstein being arrested. Greta Thunberg, there's Epstein here, so he should be on another line. There was the uranium yellow cake movement in France, which, again, all of this is kind of rising up again. Same-sex marriage debates had come up again. No, they were actually worked out that time before, in 2015. But anyway, it had risen up again. There was a Notre Dame fire. Cardinal Pell was found guilty of sexual abuse, again, very scorpionic, and Leo combination, the big guys in charge of everything, getting away with everything. We're in that again. I mean, it's almost like never stops. Julian Assange was arrested, and then Epstein was arrested. And then closer to the Leo star point, Epstein dies. The Amazon fires happen right in August 2019. The World Climate Summit, climate change, of course, big issue. Transit of Mercury happened, and soon after the coronavirus started, which is, I don't know. Then the biggest fires in Australia ever happened. Riots to do with the vaccination debates and, not having the right to do our stuff. So again, Venusian issues, but very much Leo themed. And then as we moved into the Gemini star point, the coronavirus very much polarized the community about who's right, who's wrong, who's going to get vaccinated, who's not. And that's another story. I'm not going to get into the Gemini star point yet. So you can see how you can really focus in on every star point. So again, now, as this Libra star point sort of eases in and becomes the Leo star point, all those things I mentioned here, what have we got happening? We've got the amazing new film coming out about the sex trafficking of children, The Sound of Freedom, a real story. Again, those getting away with it, those who think they're privileged enough to do that. The Wagner coup in Russia with Prigozhin, who now has disappeared. I mean, if that's not sort of a Leo thing, like I've got my own army, I've got enough money to have my own army and do this and that. The riots again in France to do with police killings of the teenager, and now a nuclear threat. Now, I haven't sort of followed the nuclear thread, but we can see enough sort of information that I'm going to get. Oh, I think I went back. Did I go back? And then as we get closer into next year, in June next year, we're going to start seeing more of the Gemini flavor lapping over the Leo flavor, and again in our own lives. So, the Gemini star point is very much about an awareness, a new awareness, a teaching, something being outed that we need to be aware of, or made, it's got to do with data gathering, of course, social media and air quality. So all of them have got more of a focus, but it's amazing what comes up and what we see. And then the Leo star point themes that, again, we go back every 4 years, from retrograde to a direct, but the themes are kind of significant. I've only done a few. Back in 2015, one of the biggest stories in America was the racial unrest about police killings as well. Okay, so again, someone's overpowering energy in regard to our own sort of freedom and spirit, very Leo-like, or Scorpio Leo at that arm, let's say. The Supreme Court affirmed same-sex marriage nationwide in the USA. Australia was a little bit earlier. I mean, anyway, that was around that time. But again, big news in 2015. Campaigns of the US presidency begin in this Leo star point theme. Just the timing of every 4 years. Trump and Obama, 2007 and 2015, began their campaigns around this star point in Leo. Domestic and family violence campaigns very much in started the Royal Commission in Australia back then. And again, there's probably not big profits for international banks, I don't know, but record-breaking profits for an Australian bank at that time. They've probably been superseded by now, 8 years ago. And then if we look back to 2019, I just saw so much fire. There was so much fire that was seeded into this Leo star point. And even going back to Amazon fires in 2007, there was Amazon fires here in 19. The Australian fires, the worst ever, the biggest hectares ever burnt, came in November, just after that star point. So again, you're seeing how it's not like it doesn't have to happen in August, right? It's a gathering of themes, and I feel them as quite powerful points. Saturn and Pluto was happening at that time too, so it's not unusual that scorched earth sort of, thing of the dry, the Capricorn is there as well. So you can't take anything else out of context. And it's interesting, 2003, we also, Colin Powell announced the weapons of mass destruction that they must go and look for as well. So this is endless how you can connect the dots. And if anyone wants to do more research and stuff like that, again, I'll be doing or have collected more for my book I'm going to write one day. The Leo star point for me is in the 9th house. And the next one is in my 6th house. So yeah, write the book, Jules. This is my kind of mission for this next 9.5 months or so. So anyway, now I just want to direct us to a Geogenic Map. I've been working with them more and more recently, and I find it just so fascinating because those areas that I just mentioned, in the Geogenic Map, Australia, this is Leo to Virgo here. If you don't understand geogenic maps, they're an ancient way of dividing the world into a particular zodiacal longitude that starts at GMT 0 Greenwich and moves 30 degrees across, right, to go, from Taurus to Gemini. This is now on the MC that I'm just talking about, and then continue through, and then, Pisces connects to Aries again, and so on. So every place on the planet has a coordinate, and, a rising coordinate, a setting coordinate, every house coordinate even is really amazing. And so Australia, so the last time, as I was saying, the fires, Australia is fully Leo on the midheaven, except for the West Coast a bit, and Virgo starts in Sydney and Brisbane here. But, the fires were in this pretty much more, they were ahead there, but anyway, very close to this whole zone where the Venus the Venus star point sort of highlighted, let's say. The Brazilian rainforest has Leo on the IC, right? So this is now the areas of the world that we're going to be really looking at and highlight, during this retrograde. And then we have rising Leo on the descendant here, and and then Leo ascends in this whole area of Europe, right? From here to there and in there. This is all of Europe, Israel. No wonder it's a hot spot as well. Okay. Sorry. Ooh. And then I've just, kind of brought it up closer, zoomed in here for us. What we can see is, now this is where Venus is and Mars is today. And of course, Venus is going to retrograde over this area. At this point, she's going right through Moscow and Jupiter. And Jupiter is right there as well. So Jupiter's in Taurus. This is also, oh, hang on, what am I doing? Sorry. It's the Taurus on the midheaven zone. Sorry. Aries and Taurus zone. As you can see, Aries here, Taurus there. And Moscow falls into the Taurus zone. The rest of Europe here is the Aries zone. Of course, that's where the nodes are going. And again, so yeah, we're seeing Jupiter crossed by Venus right over Moscow through the end of Ukraine here. And we've got the nodes moving. Ukraine, or Kiev, is actually 0 Taurus on the MC here. So this is a hotspot for sure in this area, of course, during this retrograde, and then the other places I sort of noted out. So anyway, I've just kind of started looking at the Venus star on the geodetic map, but you know, it sort of brings in a lot of stuff. So I know we've been going for about an hour and 15, so another 15 minutes is all right.
It's such an outstanding presentation. Go as long as you need. This is
oh, really? Okay. Well, now I know there's a lot there, but it's almost like there's also many different levels of people's understanding of astrology, and this is Kepler College, so I know it's going to be free out there, but really you can look back on it and, you know, do your own study. It's really amazingly fascinating. So this is the Cosmic Intelligence Agency's chart, and I love using that because it's not a person. It is, of course, directed by me, but I see it as such an inspiration when I do look at the Venus star. And again, another sort of big reason I sort of started realizing, oh my God, this, you know, a retrograde is a retrograde. And we had a retrograde coming up over our ascendant back in 2014. And it's like, oh God, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? And what happened? I mean, again, retrogrades can be amazing because they change the pace, they change the story. This is when we got 1.4 million people on Facebook. I think we were sitting on 20,000 people, or it moved to 100,000 sort of leading up to that time, and then it just went crazy. And we were just going, wow, okay, we've gathered our tribe, you know, during this retrograde. Wow, wow, wow. And so I've been following it ever since. So I'm just using it as an example. I'm not kind of delineating it. I'm just showing as an example of what we want to look at. Okay. So here is the star point. And I'm just putting the star point energy in, and I can know when looking back, either looking at it as a retrograde or as an outer conjunction point, you know, at any sort of 4-year, 8-year cycle. 20 degrees, it's a trine to the moon and Pluto, so it's quite a good star point, and square Ceres. So it's very much about resources and putting together, you know, the next trajectory. Let's say not contract so much, but you know, making plans with people and saying yes, you know, more deliberately, as we, you know, so you kind of put your points on and then know which aspects are really sort of targeted from which point. The 13 Gemini point is trine Jupiter and the nodes and Neptune. So that's a beauty for, you know, inspiration, idea, fun, you know, let's have a retreat, whatever. The other point here has been opposed by Venus herself over the years, you know, replanning things, third house stuff, you know, taking lead. It's in Aries. So, you know, it's just move on, move ahead. You can get so caught up in what other people are doing. I found that it's best to just sort of, let's not look at everything and move on. Then the Capricorn start, like I said, it's actually a Jupiter moon. Hang on, what am I saying? Jupiter moon. Jupiter's connected and the moon's connected. Oh, yeah, by square in that sort of sense. And then the Libra star point, you know, really interesting, sort of significant again. You know, how has something changed for you? So from a 10th house Scorpio Libra star point to now, you know, moving to Libra, it's maybe, you know, with more relied on alliances, not, you know, you can't trust everyone out there, especially if you don't know them. So it's almost like my own sort of version of that is that I need to work with people that I know a lot closer, and not just, you know, from that sort of social media thing, because there have been quite a few burnings there. And also this star point, you know, 4 years ago is when we got hacked, and it squares our Chiron, and it was like, oh my God, Chiron, it's like there was Pluto was on there as well. And it's like the keys were given to our web, not our web page, it was our Facebook page. anyway, it didn't happen this time. So again, very, very more cautious about who and what we're relating to. So that's just an example of how to put it in your own chart and find all the aspects. So I've just put Australian charts here. There's one chart that we use for Australia Day or Invasion Day, when Captain Cook first, put the flag in Botany Bay there, and Ed Tamplin, divined the chart for us. Astrologer Ed Tamplin, who sadly passed a few years ago, but great mundane astrology. We learned a lot from him. This is like what you sort of look at for the star points. And again, if we just kind of concentrate on the shift that happened, we've got the Libra star point on the midheaven, and thank God, instead of sort of hiding away taboo subjects, which are like Scorpio, it's like, let's get it out there into the light. Let's talk about this. Let's give our First Nations people, a voice. It's fantastic. And then we see the Leo star point here, in the 7th house, sort of very much bringing in who's going to vote for this. And there's a lot of Australians that are very wary of it. The big debate is that we don't know enough about it. What does it mean? And the polls are showing that, it's kind of negative. Not enough Australians want it. Anyway, so this is how you can follow the kind of story in that sense. And now this is the inauguration chart. When Australia became Australia, where are we? Here we have a point right here, right on the descendants, a 29 degrees Aries chart. And again, so significant. Are we giving a voice to our First Nations people? The Capricorn, the Gemini star point coming up next in the 2nd house. We will know by then what has happened, of course, and how Australia has voted, or and in all of them, I've put what's called the head star point, okay, the one that comes before that birth date or that radix chart. So 25 Libra for Australia, or back then 77, remember, or 1788, that era, and then in this time 15 Cancer. So when your star point comes back, it's important. So those of us that were born with a Virgo star point in the 60s, let's say, that's the Leo star point now. That is our head star point coming back to its, it's the same star point as they cycle around. This is the USA chart. 1776 independence, the Sibley chart. I'm not going to go into, you can use the other charts that others use if you like. Tell me what you find. But really interesting here as well, of course, the 8th house of debt and alliance, not alliances, trust or whatever here for the Leo star point, the Libra star point having changed from the Scorpio to the 11th. So again, with the Libra star point, I don't think it's all quite there yet. It's more transparency with the air sign, or let's talk about it issues. But again, remember, it's going back to Scorpio. So that's significant. The head star point of the USA is this 0 Scorpio point, okay? There is one on the IC. So as the Aries point now goes into motion closer and closer, well, actually it is on the IC. This is now 2025. You'll have a new president or not by then. What does that mean? Anyway, looking at it that way. Ukraine. Look at this. Their whole chart here is exactly where the retrograde is happening. Beginning, they've got a Venus return exactly retrograde starting. Their star point is 29 Leo. So, significant changes to what's going on in the Ukraine for sure. We've seen hints of it. What will actually happen, I'm not sure. I do hope it's more, for the positive outcome, but there's just so much going on in regard to, tiptoeing around what can be done because of threats and so on. But look, the war in Ukraine started. They had a star point right on their ascendant and north node. and the war in Ukraine began. And then we had this outer point in the 9th house, changing to Libra, alliances, allegiances, who's on our side, so on, so on, so on. And now in the 7th house, again, relying on, well, it's the house of open enemies as well. So, that's a big one. Let's hope it works to their advantage there. And then Volodymyr Zelensky is completely, fried in this action. He's got star points in very significant places, and he was born the star point before his birth was 0 Aquarius, with the outer conjunction with, as we understand, Venus in the underworld in the 9th house. And I mean, the war in Ukraine started with Venus as the morning star, and she was very bright. And I remember seeing images of the war beginning and going, oh no, that's Venus. The ancients, the Mayans, always saw Venus as the warrior princess, or warrior star, warrior Venus, or war goddess as the morning star. So anyway, he's born with Venus conjunct the sun, and he is going through what we relate to the trial of someone born with Venus conjunct the sun in the Aquarian spirit, looking after everybody, 9th house, international, I'm going to say superstar. Anyway, it's now in his 8th house. He's got a star point here in his 5th house. I suppose unexpected hero in that kind of sense. I don't know if it was part of the plan to plant him as the Ukrainian president. I don't want to get into it. But anyway, he's got one that's moving to his moon. Sorry, this Leo star point is moving to his moon over coming years. And he's had one over his Gemini star point as well. So again, a really good way to connect what we're looking at for someone and their focus points. And now I've put Russia and Putin in here as well. Putin's chart is a little bit dodgy, not knowing if it's exactly the right chart or, the right date, I think, but I'm using it anyway. But look at that. The Leo star point is right on his midheaven, his node and Pluto, highlighting exactly and the story so completely for what's going on there, Mr. King, Mr. Superstar as well. What else am I seeing? He's got one here crossing over. That will, hit his Libra, but years down the track. He's got one in the 8th house. He was born with one in the 8th house as well, so he's very secretive and he's very untrustworthy. It's all kind of maybe in that head star there. Again, the Leo, look, the Aries point moving to Pisces. Now, that is only going to happen by 2040. But as I was going to say, the USA chart, this point here moves to Pisces only by 2040, but it's hovering at 0 Aries for, in the next, 16 years or so. So this is, again, something that you'd look at as a big transition when we got a star point moving over 0 Aries as well, as it did back 250 years ago and 250 years before. So again, putting the bigger cycles with the smaller cycles. So that was just, anyway, I'm nearly there. I'm nearly there. So as we go, we got the next conjunction at 13 on the 13th of August at 20 Leo that starts off this next cycle. And again, depending on how diligent we want to be to follow that cycle, the main parts is when Venus again stations direct and retrograde, when she reaches brightness, maximum elongation, and then she disappears again behind the sun. We can see that from the 28th of April until she rises again is July the 10th. That's a long time gone, girl. So this is again that area of the chart that we don't want to, or the Zodiac and Venus star points that we don't want to ignore. And then comes back as the evening star, maximum elongation. And you can track, the speed she's doing, the degrees he's on, and you'll learn a lot by examining this kind of chart, okay? yeah, so let's get back to the star point in Leo, and what it means to us. I've just added the declination cycle here to show that she's at 7 degrees north latitude, declination, meaning that, again, she's off the sun. It's not a transit, right? It's not an eclipse, but from our perspective, they're infused. So think about, everything that I've put into this so far about, a retrograde is all about renewing and regenerating, revamping something about ourselves, or the way we do things, or the way we love ourselves, or the way we appreciate our loved ones, or, there's just so many versions of it. But, again, a refocusing and a recreation of what do we want from life? This is our intention mission for this time, right? Of these 40 days and 40 nights. It's in Leo, so it's really what brings us the most joy and happiness. I find myself going, oh, we could do that, but do I want to do that? Nah, because it involves this or that. So, I think we get better at it as we get a bit older or mature. We don't just jump into things because we're invited or, because we want to do. It's like, it's really doing things when you're happier. The world is happier around you, isn't it? So I think that's the mission of Leo. What makes us happy, what makes us tick, what makes the heart sing. And again, the love of self and doing things from the heart is the most, beautiful, divine sort of energy and story, or of the divine feminine as well. Doing it with love, that's a Venus story. So, kind of find yourself there somehow, and your love story, let's say, your life love story. And I just want to add this because I think it's just so beautiful. A lot of us do astrology and understand it as a type of alchemy, as, every time we look at our charts and we find something else more about Venus or our moon or our ascendant or whatever, different speakers, different books that we read, we get another insight and we go, oh, yeah. We add it to the story, and then things become automatic, that we look at that Venus and it's just automatic. Everything we know, it's just automatic. It's all there, positive and negative. Again, careful what we sort of put into that every spot in the astrology chart that we know something about. Is that Venus represents the 5th stage of alchemy. And of course, these 7 planets rule the 7 stages of alchemy, or the 7 steps of alchemy, back in the 1500s and before and so on. And so it rules fermentation, the phase of fermentation, the 5th stage, when after the sun, has been blasted and everything sort of like all the qualities have come through. It's the fermentation phase where when you see, compost and stuff, and you start seeing the glistening on top of it, right? Like when things start becoming more reactive, like copper, and luminescent. And that's why the peacock is, the peacock feathers represent Venus and that luminescent phase. When, from, let's say, that sort of, again, fermentation, we see a new growth arising. So how perfect for a retrograde, and sort of, for examining Venus and what we're sort of going through. And I'll just go, the Splendor Solis, if you've never seen it, it's beautiful. You can see it online. There are books about it and what have you. But, these beautiful palettes that are drawn. Here's Venus up in her chariot here. They're all in chariots, all the planets, the 7 planets. They're all in chariots. She's got Libra on one wheel, and they say Aries on the internet, but that's not true. It must be Taurus. She's got Eros here, balancing with his arrow, right? Balancing, or Eros, Cupid, balancing with his arrow, shooting it up to the sun with a heart through it. She's driven by, the chariot's driven by doves. So it's all, pure Venusian symbolism. In the alembic, of course, is that representation of the peacock arising out of the fermentation and the beautiful colors. And it's like igniting this new spirit, going, oh, I can see. I can see the magic and I can see what can happen with it. Right, I've written about it there. So reanimating a new level of being. Fermentation can be achieved through activities that include intense prayer, desire for mystical union, breakdown of the personality to, reignite, transpersonal therapy, psychedelic drugs, and deep meditation. Perfectly suits a retrograde. The fermentation is the arousing, I'd like to say, of the living energy in the body to heal and enliven. So, we want to look at, let's say some dead zones, right? Liven them up again. It is the evolution of life to produce consciousness in matter, which is exactly what, Venus manifestation symbol is all about. And anyway, further into this picture, everyone's sort of having fun in the forest, in this verdant green environment, kissing, courting, dancing, playing music, all Venusian things, and drinking wine. I'll talk about that. And what's wine all about? Fermentation. It's about getting the joy from something that takes time and ferments, and then, kind of celebrating with it. And then there's a whole lot of naked bathers here as well. Again, representing, how we sort of see ourselves and value ourselves in our true spirit. Anyway, it's all fascinating. This is now the cycle and what it looks like in the night sky, or let's say we don't see the lions and crabs. We don't see the lions and crabs, but again, through the apps like Stellarium, we can put them on. So Southern Hemisphere view, Northern Hemisphere view. And this is, again, showing that Venus and the Sun are not on top of each other like an eclipse. And all of the Venus, let's say, loops are so interesting. Adam Gainsbourg showed them to us once. They've all got a personality. Like the Gemini loop goes from the Northern Hemisphere, peaks right because the Gemini star point is very close to the node of Venus, so it happened, and that's where the transit happened, and then goes down to the Southern Hemisphere. The Capricorn loop looks like a Capricorn symbol, and then this one, the Leo loop, my software is not showing the dynamics of the different pattern of the loop, but here, Venus turns retrograde, she goes back, meets the sun, and of course the yellow line's the ecliptic, or what we divide into the zodiac, and then comes back through. So we, seeing it visually is also gives us a lot of information. But also, I just want to again look at the Lion constellation, as astronomers still call Leo. Many astrologers like Gemini Brett very much advocating that we should call the constellations the Lion and the sign Leo, so we differentiate the difference. I'm not going to get into that now, but I just want us all to just have a look at that and what that sort of means. Like, or what is that symbol? It's like the Sun and Venus. It's like they're playing ball. It's like they're playing. The crab and the lion are playing ball with these two somehow. And maybe the ball's being moved more towards the crab, after this, because the Venus star point moves backwards, remember? So it's moved over Leo, and I've kind of go, okay, it's like a bit like Regulus has moved to zero Virgo now. And it's almost like enough of this crazy playtime on the planet with all these egotistical maniacs, ruling the roost, and maybe moving over to a more protective and caring, as we understand, originally the constellations and signs were together. So the meanings are very similar, that we can think about it as to more caring about each other. So it might, again, this is going to happen over a long period of time, but you can see it. We're right in the middle of something, aren't we? And for our own sort of journeys and personal journeys, we are also sort of changing something that's moving very slowly, but also very, very much significantly in the next, retrograde loop that we have happening here. So again, all of this comes together to make us, much more aware of what we're creating and designing and being very much part of in our life, as opposed to thinking, and blaming and, directing energy out from us, right? Again, I think this is the spirit of, bringing it into our own hearts to start with, and then moving out from there, right? Taking on all, as much as we can in our own goodness and love, and then directing it out there into the world, which is just, anyway, a lot of you will have different kind of difficulties or hardships to get through that yes, concentrate on yourself, all right, for now. And then again, that's a very Leo sort of version of it. And just remember that these five-star points ebbing all the time in your astrology chart, and tap into them whenever you need to, study them, and I'm sure the bounty of it all will be magnificent. So that's it for me from this presentation. I know there's heaps of questions, and I don't know if you can gather them like as in a what do you call it? A list, so I can see them later, because I might not get to read them now, but I love to.
I think we can download them all and put them all together for you. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. All right. I might answer them somewhere online or something like that. But just before I go and stop my share, we do this every 9.5 months. We've been doing it since 2017. So our 9th program on this Venus Masterclass. This was also knowing that I was doing this for Kepler. I've put a lot of info in there as a beginning to this, so we don't have to repeat it in the class, right? And every time we do it, we have done it with many of the same people: Adam, Gemini, Ariel, and myself. We've had Patricia Walsh and Kelly Hunter and a few other, astrologers over the time. But again, every time it's different. We've done afternoons where we've had 4 speakers, but it goes for 7 hours. So now because there's just so much to share. So we're dividing it up over a few weeks this time. So if anyone's interested in more work on the Venus star, and my particular part is going to be about delineating your phase of your Venus cycle and, what it means and so on. And this shows how many we've done. So we're here, and we've got one more to do to fill in the complete 2-sided cycle, right, of 10 stars. So these are all, you can go back to them. They're really well priced for what they are. Some, we just drop the prices because, this is a thing, isn't it, Callum? Like, there's just so much astrology, and you see things, what you've done, like pile up, and you go, what do we do with them? Yeah, that's what good with YouTube and stuff, isn't it? But anyway, you will learn a lot, I promise you. If otherwise, you might be interested in more of what the CIA does. We have membership plan. We've got 120 presentations that you can learn amazing stuff from, with great astrologers. A bit like Kepler, we're just not as big. You guys have got more, when did Kepler start? A long time ago.
2000, I think.
Oh, is that all? Oh, wow.
I believe so. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. I think, 2000. Yeah.
Anyway, lots of ways to join, and you can access all that. And we've got 20 new webinars a year that we added to that archive. And the next one we've got coming up is very well suited to Leo, Venus. It's about the art in the chart to do with the psyche and symbol, from a wonderful astrologer in New York, Claudia Bader. Is her name's here? Yes. So that's coming up this week. You can join that separately. Look at our Time Lords magazine. There's heaps of information in there as well. Sometimes you think, how much do we do? How much do all of us do? But we love astrology. That's why, isn't it? So again, lots to share and lots to look into if you want to go further with my astrology or with the CIA's astrology. And I really just wish you all the best for this coming retrograde, and I hope you got a lot of great information from this all, which you can watch again, of course.
Well, Julia, that was an absolutely outstanding webinar, and thank you so much. And again, keeping in line with Venus, just a visually stunning presentation with the graphics and all the information that you put together. Absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Absolutely wonderful.